Good morning, everyone, and very nice to see smiling faces. We have a we have a full house, and we are expecting more than 650 participants joining us on site today. Greetings also to those who are joining online, more than 400 participants joining us online. I am Leia Arboleda from the ADB's Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development Sector Office. Welcome to ADB headquarters. For the Food Security Forum, it's ADB's signature event happening every 2 years. The last one was held virtually in 2022 and face-to-face both in 2019 and 2016. So this is the first time that we are holding it in the hybrid format. So starting today until the end of the week, feel free to engage with fellow participants, learn from the stories and rich knowledge that they will share, and more importantly, explore potential partnerships. We will be holding 2 days of plenary sessions with thematic and country breakouts, and 2 days of deep dive sessions on emerging and priority areas. Feel free also to visit the Technology and Innovation Marketplace at ADB's main lobby to explore what some of our partners are up to in terms of new technologies and innovations that we can use in our projects. So before we proceed, let's get some house rules out of the way. We are aligning with ADB's advocacy of going paperless. So we have uploaded the agenda in the forum website, foodsecurityforum.adb.org, and we will update this as we go along. All the materials and session recordings will also be posted there, so please visit the site from time to time. For on-site participants, we are providing QR codes posted at the auditorium hallway and the secretariat area for daily registration. For each session, we will also provide 2 QR codes, one for your questions and one for your daily evaluation. We will try our best to accommodate and respond to your questions. These QR codes will be flashed on screen so that everyone here at ADB and online can participate. To officially open the forum, let me invite the moderator for the opening session. The Leaders Forum is an exciting session with our key partners, experts, and international leaders sharing their insights on the challenges to global food security, climate change, and biodiversity loss. We need to understand better how we can make a fundamental shift in policy making and investment priorities towards achieving sustainable and resilient agri-food systems. Schengen Fan is our chair professor and dean of the Academy of Global Food Economics and Policy at the China Agricultural University. Prior to this, he also served as Director General of the International Food Policy Research Institute from 2009 to 2019. Schengen has been a consistent partner of ADB, and we are so glad that he can join us this week. Calling Schengen, over to you. Thank you.
Well, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Well, it is really my great honor to moderate this leadership session. So we will have several keynote speakers as well as panelists. As I stand here, the region is facing tremendous challenges in food-related issues. More than 370 million people still suffer hunger, despite a rapid and dynamic growth in this region. And equally important, many people suffer from so-called hidden hunger, lack of micronutrients. I think that number probably is equally large, although we do not have an exact number. At the same time, the climate change is hitting the region's food systems. 350 million smallholders in the region are particularly vulnerable. They do not have capacity. They do not have access to financial services. They do not have access to technical services. So it's a key challenge for them to adapt to the climate change. And here we have so many stakeholders from different parts of the region. I see, and even global level, the CGIAR, Ismahan just joined us. Ismahan is the executive managing director, EMD of CGIAR. And in the meantime, the new ERI Director General, International Rice Research Institute, Yvonne Pinto. So just joined IRI. And I know all these different institutions, including my own former institute, IPRI, have worked with ADB very closely to tackle some of the challenges we are facing today. So I'm so happy that the ADB, well, thank you for your great leadership to bring different stakeholders here, the private sector, the research institutions, policymakers, and NGOs and so on. I think it is very critical for us to discuss some of the common challenges we face. We must take quick actions to rapidly shifting our policies, our investment priorities, and also business practices. So can we bring private sector into this? And equally important is to change our own behavior. So as a consumers, can we consume healthy, nutritious, and sustainable diets of food? As policymakers, can you change your behavior? And private sector, look at a long-term sustainable development, not just short-term profit gain. So with this, I would like to invite the president of ADB, Masa Asakawa. He preferred to call him President Masa. Welcome, President Masa.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Minister Pabidola Davy, Minister Stephen Victor, Executive Director McCain, distinguished guests and colleagues, good morning. Thank you for joining us for the 2024 Asia and the Pacific Food Security Forum. For the next 2 days, we will focus on finding effective solutions to the region's climate and food security crisis. Having enough nutritious food to eat is something many of us take for granted. But imagine you are a parent without the means to buy protein or vegetables for your family. You can only feed your children grains and have no other choice but to skip meals for yourself. Rice prices soared more than 40% last year in 2023. Such increase in food prices are eroding the purchasing power of poor families in Asia. Unfortunately, nearly 2 million people in Asia experience this hardship and lack healthy diet. In fact, over half of the people in the world affected by hunger live in Asia. Climate change and the worsening droughts and floods that come with it is another issue that we may not fully understand sitting in this auditorium. But if you are a farmer who lost another harvest because of yet another drought, it is a real threat to you, your family, and your livelihood. This is a reality for 40% of the workforce in Asia and the Pacific who are employed in agri-food systems such as farmers, processing workers, and retail workers. Climate change, nature loss, and economic shocks all put enormous pressure on the region's fragile food systems. This has also pushed the world off track to meet the Sustainable Development Goal of eradicating global hunger. In short, food insecurity is causing tremendous suffering and undermining the prospects for development. The world needs to act urgently to address this crisis exacerbated by extreme weather events and geopolitical conflicts. That is why in 2022, when we had an annual meeting here in Manila, I announced a comprehensive plan for the Asian Development Bank to provide at least $14 billion in financing by 2025 to support our developing member countries so that they can transform their agri-food systems and address the underlying cause of food insecurity. I am happy to report to you that we have already committed $7.6 billion of this 14 billion and are on pace to deliver the rest by the end of 2025. Behind these financial resources is a plan, not only to address the symptoms of food insecurity, like malnutrition, but also to transform the entire agri-food system. As you know, agriculture imposes great cost to the environment, such as water exploitation, land degradation, biodiversity damage, and soaring emissions. And so, we need to transform this sector by reinvesting in the region's ecosystems, supporting farmers and agribusinesses, opening up trade, and cutting emissions. At COP28 late last year, 159 countries, including the majority of our developing member countries, DMCs, endorsed the Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems, and Climate Action. ADB is strongly committed to this transformative effort. We must create a food system that is healthy, prosperous, and sustainable for the planet and for generations to come. Let me end by emphasizing that this transformation requires strong collaboration. We must forge partnerships to achieve food security while protecting the planet. These two objectives are not mutually exclusive. This forum is an occasion for us to review our progress on this issue and chart our path forward. I wish you a pleasant stay in Manila and productive discussions ahead. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Well, thank you, President Massa. I think ADB's leadership is very critical. So ADB committed $14 billion over 2022 and 2025 for tackling some of the food security issues. Well, it is time to review the progress and identify the way forward. I think even beyond 2025, we're really looking forward ADB's leadership continue to guide the region to use limited resources to transform food systems to the objectives President Massa just mentioned. Food system must produce healthy, nutritious foods, must be sustainable, low carbon, resilient, and inclusive. So these are the key objectives the food system or agri-food system must achieve. So with that, let's thank you, President Massa, again. So now we go to the keynote speakers. So the first keynote speaker is Mrs. Cindy McCain, Executive Director of the World Food Program. We know that World Food Program plays a pivotal role in making sure that everybody in the world will have access to not just the food, healthy and nutritious food. I know you're busy in dealing with all kinds of emerging issues in the world, Gaza, or the war in Europe, or some sort of droughts or floods somewhere. So thank you for coming, during a very busy schedule. Welcome. Let's welcome Mrs. Cindy McCain.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today, and especially happy to be able to discuss this particular subject with everyone in the room. It's very clear, as was just mentioned, that the world is on fire, and food now takes the front page of every newspaper and takes the lead on many stories on many national networks around the world. I'm grateful for that, but I'm also sad for that, because that means we're in trouble. President Massa, thank you for inviting me to take part in these discussions today. They come at a critically important time for the Asia and Pacific region. As the impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss fuel hunger in a number of countries across the region, it's vital that we all come together to find common solutions. With effective collaboration, we can improve long-term food security and strengthen food systems. But it requires a shift in investment priorities, one that lays strong foundations for more sustainable and resilient systems of food production and distribution in the face of these growing threats. This shift also needs greater coordination between governments and international financial institutions and other development partners. It also needs strong leadership at the national level, and it requires more joint analysis and a common set of data metrics to track and assess the progress being made. This task is more urgent than ever. The world is facing an unparalleled hunger crisis fueled by conflict, COVID-19 aftershocks, and the accelerating climate crisis. At the World Food Program, we see the impact of this crisis everywhere we work, including here in the APAC region, in the 17 countries where we have operations. Many of these nations are gripped by concurrent and long-term crises that will continue to fuel humanitarian needs for years to come. But this is happening just as funding for relief operations is drying up. In recent months, WFP has been forced to make the painful decision to cut rations for millions of vulnerable people, including 10 million people just in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, this is happening right across the humanitarian system. For aid agencies, this is our new operating environment. It's our new normal. This is why we must invest in programs to address the root causes of hunger and strengthen food systems, especially in those countries which now find themselves on the front lines of climate change. So I congratulate the ADB on its plans to allocate at least $34 billion for climate adaptation between now and 2030. WFP hopes that a significant portion of these funds will be invested in programs to support smallholder farming communities, so they get the tools and resources they need to adopt climate-smart food production techniques. Post-harvest food loss is another area that's ripe for investment as part of the comprehensive strategy to maximize food production in our warming world. And small outlays can make a real difference. WFP runs programs with smallholders where we provide equipment and teach them storage techniques so their crops stay fresh until they are ready to be sold. I'm proud to say that we have reduced post-harvest losses by up to 98% among the farmers that we have trained. We consider that all the food produced in the world, around 40% of it, goes to waste. Tackling this issue would transform long-term food security among the most vulnerable communities here in Asia and also around the globe. When investing in food systems, we also need to ensure an increased focus on nutrition-related outcomes. Rural communities across Asia are experiencing concerning rates of malnutrition and micronutrient deficiencies. Lifestyle changes are a factor, along with difficulty accessing a sufficiently wide range of nutritious foods. In an area that needs specific attention, adequate nutrition is absolutely essential for children. That's why I'm such a passionate advocate for school feeding programs, which ensure young people get the healthy food they need to nourish their minds and their bodies. These programs also support smallholder farmers, create jobs, and benefit entire communities. So investing in nutrition really does mean investing in the future economic growth of your nation. Excellencies, WFP is proud of our thriving partnership with the Asia Development Bank, which has grown considerably just in the past 4 years. Today, we are working together in countries across the region, including Afghanistan, Myanmar, Nepal, and of course right here in the Philippines. We're also planning to partner together in a number of other countries in the period ahead. But I believe there is still more that we can do together. The ADB, WFP, and governments across the APAC region. If we leverage each other's expertise and step up our partnerships, we can ensure that investments in ending hunger and strengthening food systems against the impacts of climate change are used to provide swift and effective support to the people most in need. WFP stands ready to lend our deep operational expertise and reach in support of this critically important agenda. We're here to help you, your governments, and your citizens. With determination, innovation, and above all, cross-sectoral collaboration, we can and we must rise to the collective challenge and bring new hope to vulnerable communities all across Asia. Thank you for having me.
Well, WFP is in the frontier in fighting hunger. Every day they deliver so much food to the people in need. Afghanistan, Gaza, or the war areas in Ukraine. So thank you for your leadership. But in the meantime, the WFP also transformed itself to a more development agency, building resilience for smallholders, help to improve nutrition of many children, women, and the people who are really micronutrient deficient, we call it hidden hunger. And this is actually quite prevalent in the region. So thank you, Executive Director McCain. So our next speaker is Chu Dongyu, FAO Director General. Unfortunately, he cannot be here in person. So we will play his video message from him. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to start by conveying my appreciation to the President of the Asian Development Bank, His Excellencies Masatsugu Asakawa, for the fruitful collaboration between our two organizations in addressing the complex challenges of the global food insecurity, the impact of the climate crisis, and the biodiversity losses in the Asia-Pacific region. Over the past 20 years, the economies of many nations in the region have been moving out of the category of the least developed and graduate into a middle income status. However, this positive change are not happening at the same time equally across all the countries or even equitably within them. This situation needs to be addressed urgently. In 2022, around 735 million people faced hunger globally. This is an increase of the 122 million than in 2019, before the pandemic. Over 3.1 billion population, that is 42% of world populations, were unable to afford a health net. Despite the notable progress, hunger persists in some parts of the Asia-Pacific region, where nearly half of the world undernourished population live, and nearly 2 billion people cannot afford a health net. Rural and coastal communities, small-scale farmers, and agro-food system workers, particularly women and youth, are disproportionately affected by these multidimensional challenges. Our agri-food system, as currently structured, contributes to the environmental degradation, greenhouse gas emissions, and biodiversity loss, among others. Further aggravated by the impact of the climate crisis, thereby negatively impacting the livelihood of the most vulnerable. For this reason, we need to transform them urgently because they also offer a huge opportunity to increase the efficiencies, to produce more with less, and to ensure the right to the food to all. To achieve this, it is critical that the climate finance in agri-food systems be substantially increased. Yet, on the contrary, the current share of total climate finance flows allocated to the agri-food system is declining, with a decrease from the 34% in 2010 to only 20% in 2021. And only 1.7% of the global climate finance goes to the smallholder farmers, fish farmers, herder, and forest people in the developing nations. Despite their disproportionate vulnerability to the climate crisis, to address these challenges, we must urgently transform the region and the global agri-food system to be more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable. Ladies and gentlemen, scaling up investment and targeting the financing to generate impact at scale is critical to drive the innovation, science, and technology, foster sustainability, and promote the inclusive growth throughout agri-food value chains. We must also take urgent action to ensure the sustainable management and the use of our shared natural resources, biodiversity, restore ecosystem, increase climate action, both in terms of adaptation and mitigation. Together with partners, FAO has implemented several coordinated projects aimed at supporting the transformation of agri-food system in the Asia-Pacific region. This includes a roadmap to the global biodiversity framework targeted to ensure the proper planning and reporting on ecosystem restoration efforts. The National Water Roadmap initiative supports the developing countries ensures the sustainable water management. At COP28, FAO launched the Global Roadmap for achieving SDG 2 without breaching the 1.5 degrees C threshold. That underscores the critical need to prioritize the agri-food system, not only to ensure the food security, but also to reduce the burden on the nature and the climate, while the exploring increase the climate financing. And FAO is co-leading the Global Environment Facility Clean and Healthy Oceans Integrated Program, a source to sea initiative that will direct over $100 million in the grant to help the countries curb land-based pollution and improve the coastal environments and larger marine ecosystems, together with the Asian Development Bank and other financial institutions. In the Asia-Pacific region, we are supporting the countries to access climate finance through the projects such as the Scaling Up Climate Ambition on land use and agriculture through the nationally determined contributions and the national adaptation plans that supports the increased action to cope with the impact of the climate crisis in the agriculture and land use sectors. FAO flagship initiatives such as One Southern Digital Village, the Hand in Hand initiative, and One Country, One Priority products aim to eradicate hunger and poverty, promote equality, and encouraging the wider participation of the women and youth. Gender transformative actions and youth empowerment are equally crucial aspects of our agenda. And we must recognize the unique context of the region's small island development state, SEEDS. And at FAO, we are working with these countries to implement anticipatory action against the multiple hazards and risks they face. Central to all this effort is the need for national ownership and commitment. Countries must take the lead, aligning political willingness with the concrete actions and adequate funding. Dear colleagues, FAO and Asia Development Bank's partnership span over 55 years. Recently, our collaboration has focused on supporting the fragile and conflict-affected countries such as Afghanistan. Going forward, our partnership will be even stronger, supporting public and private investment in the region. In 2023 alone, the FO Investment Center supported the design of 18 public investment projects financed by our partners, international financial institutions, in 9 countries in the region. Collaboration across sectors with multiple partners and across the geographic regions is necessary to address the complex global challenges efficiently, effectively, and coherently. We should draw inspiration from the dynamic change occurring in the Asia-Pacific region, where the region's economies are progressing despite the persistent challenges, and of the hope for a bright future. Together, we can achieve the better production, better nutrition, a better environment, a better life, leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Well, the FAO-DG also mentioned so-called agri-food systems approach to guide FAO's work. So whether it's agri-food or food system, I think basically it's the same message, same context, and same approach. So using more integrated approach, engage different disciplines and also different partners. I think both Cindy and FAO-DG mentioned about a partnership. So now we go to the next round, the panel discussions. So let me introduce one by one. The first is the Minister, Pavitra Vanarachi. So I try my best. She is the Minister of Irrigation and Wildlife. Mostly, I want to thank you to host one of our sister CGIAR centers, IMI, International Water Management Institute. Please take a seat somewhere. The second is Stefan Victor, the Minister from Pano. And I think he represents the Pacific country. So they're facing unique challenges in tackling some of the food security and natural resource management issues. The third panelist is Jo Swinen. Where's Jo? Jo Swinen is currently IPRI Director General. He is also the Managing Director of the food systems. Can you imagine? Yes, very much on food system. Jo, please welcome. Please come. Yes. So next one is also Jo actually, Jo Puri. Jostana Puri. She asked us to call her Jo, representing IFAD. So she is the Associate Vice President in charge of knowledge, in charge of strategy, and many different. I'm very happy to advise IFAD on its next flagship report on rural development. Now, obviously, we wanted to invite Mrs. McCain to come here again. We wanted to maximize your contribution, so not only keynote speaker, but also as a panelist to reflect what we have just discussed. So our final, but not the least, the White House sort of key person on food nutrition security, so the Director of Global Food Security and Development Planning of National Security Council, the White House, Farrell Barriers. I think she's online. Is she connected? If not, we can always wait. You know, she has been very active in the Washington, D.C. area in supporting U.S. government's investment in agriculture and food. So welcome, Farah. Are you there?
I am here. Can you
Very
hear
good.
me? Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I wanted to say thank you so much for the president of the ADB and Extinguished Excellencies on this panel. I wanted to express my sincere interest in seeing great ideas that come from this forum. We, as the United States, have been giving towards food security since the Ukraine war, and prior to that, over $17.4 billion since 2022. And in that space, over 10 billion of that amount has gone to humanitarian efforts, of which we hope that will be a starting point, but really to focus on resilience, resilience against climate issues, resilience against nature issues, and moreover, to empower countries, our partner countries, to really withstand crises of the future. We hope through this forum that we will be able to leverage our work through the Asian Development Bank and other multilateral development banks and coming up with key solutions that really adhere to financial necessary resilience balances. We've worked very closely with our private sector to come up with innovative ways to be responsive to food crises. We also hope that we are able to come up with new partnerships, and through these partnerships, arrive at a set of decisions, policies, and scalable recommendations in order to leverage all of our great tool sets throughout EFAD, IFPRI, FAO, and other Rome-based agencies such as the World Food Program. We want us to be responsive not only to the world's crises, but understand that these crises, especially on food issues, really come to bear for all countries, no matter which income level you are in, and also more importantly, to set the ground truth of the future. We want to think about the blue economy, as well as resilience. There is this wonderful adage that we use at the White House of saving for today's future really requires investments that are scalable, replicable, and also with our partners in hand. The Asian Pacific presents an opportunity to not only deal with small island country issues, climate issues, but also to innovatively really think through financing through the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and other great organizations that have been at the forefront of coming up with great ideas. The United States remains committed and has been diligent in order to support our partners. Through this exercise of looking through great opportunities, we look forward to not only the Asian Development Bank's ideas, but ways that we can really highlight how we all come together as a global community to help people that are not only suffering, but also create livelihoods, job opportunities, involve youth, and also think about women and other marginalized groups. With that, I wanted to say thank you very much for your time. I'm very, very much looking forward to the opportunity to work with all of you. I'm very privileged to be on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Farah. This is very late in Washington, so I think your message is clear and sound. From a donor's perspective, the U.S. partnership with CGIAR, with some of the development banks, ADB, the World Bank, and more important, at the country level. I remember USAID supported lots of country operations of CGIAR and the banks, so we want to thank you for your great partnership with them. We're looking forward to further strengthen that partnership. So now let's come back to the room. So I wanted to give you 5 minutes each, just to highlight some of the key messages you would like to have, whether from a country perspective, or from a research institution's perspective, or from a global sort of a humanitarian, actually equally important development agency, how we can tackle these complex issues of food, nutrition security, and climate change. So we'll start with our minister from Sri Lanka. Use your microphone. 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for giving the opportunity. Thank you so much for giving the opportunity. So I would like to share our experiences. When it comes to Sri Lanka, we have experienced financial crisis in 2022. So to tackle these issues, the government, so many measures were taken by the government. And firstly, what we have done to overcome this financial crisis and to help farmers, we were able to provide seeds, planting materials, and fertilizer for farmers. And we were also able to provide food aid by way of, in a form of dry ration and financial aids, cash payments for who are suffering, who are battling food security. And through a special request to the ADB, we were able to obtain 10 million US dollars for agriculture promotion, and we were able to obtain 20 million US dollars for organic agriculture. So that is the basic explanation from our country, because actually in 2022 our country was bankrupt and we had to do so many things to overcome all these things, and our farmers were suffering, so we have to give a lot of aid to them. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Minister Vanachia. Okay, so let's go to the next one. I will have some questions for you. The next one is our minister from Palau, Stephen Victor. And he represents a unique perspective, the Pacific countries.
Good morning, President Massa. Good morning to distinguished member of the panel, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to join this Food Security Forum and to share a perspective from a small island developing state of Palau. We live in a world where everything is being impacted by the triple planetary crisis: climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. These all impact food security, as has been mentioned. Palau, as a small island, imports over 80% of the food we eat. So we are a very insecure nation. That is because we've changed preference of the way we eat, from eating food that we traditionally grew and harvest to eating things that are fast, sweet, salty, fatty. I think we all know this situation because we all choose to do so. So to me, achieving food security is really changing the way we think about food, and also changing the way we think about policy. There's a tendency for us to think that for every problem, we simply throw the money at it and it will fix itself. But sometimes throwing money at a problem creates more problem, because we are not addressing the very reason why that problem persists. And that's because of the way we think about food. We sit in this room today and we think that our food will come to our table by someone else. Someone else will produce it, someone else will transport it to the market, and we simply go and buy it, or we go to the restaurant and purchase it. We live in a world of convenience, and that world of convenience has led us to the problems that we experience today. So we need to think about 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. How do we keep the same problem of convenience from affecting the future generations? Mrs. McCain talked about school feeding programs, which is very important, but we need to change the way our children thinks about food. Not just accessible food, but healthy, nutritious food. I'm sure many of us face the same challenge. Our kids don't like to eat vegetables. They rather eat French fries. So these are the very challenge that unless we address, we will never achieve food security that is inclusive, that is accessible, that is nutritious. Because we make the choice to eat something that is unhealthy, easily accessible, affordable. So I pose this to all of us as we think about addressing our food security. I don't see any youth participation amongst us. And yet, the very food security that we talk about is food security for those youth and the next generation. So when we talk about sectoral inclusivity in addressing this problem, we need to address it in a more holistic way, not just from a financial perspective, from an education perspective, from health perspective, and from an environmental perspective. Only then can we truly address this food security issue that we want it to be inclusive. I go to many meetings, and these are very sectoral meetings. I have the opportunity to oversee a ministry that is responsible for producing and protecting the environment at the same time. So I can have that perspective. That's not the same for many countries where one hand tried to produce and one hand tried to protect, and they don't talk to each other. That's a challenge that we face every day in the way we try to address national and global issues. So, while I don't have a very specific solution at hand, my view is the need to change the way we think about problems. Problems are not all solved by simply throwing money at it. We need to look at the future, and we need to say, how are our children going to think about these problems, and how we drive them to a solution that helps themselves, not only helps us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Minister Victor. I think both ministers highlighted some of the challenges and possible solutions in food and nutrition security area in Sri Lanka, particularly after 2022 financial crisis, and how they can really develop a future strategy to support poor, hungry people to transform their life. Okay, now I move to Jo Swinen, IPRI Director General. So I didn't give you the question first round. I wanted to let you think freely, how IPRI or even CGIR, you are also a managing director for food system, can provide a knowledge support for the region, for the country's food system transformation.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Schengen, and it's wonderful to be here. Actually, it looks much more impressive from here than it was when I was sitting there. So it's great to be here. We're in Manila, so we're actually an hour driving from IRRI, the International Rice Research Institute. And of course, this institute is associated with major innovations over the past 50, 60 years in improving food security in the world, often associated with the Green Revolution. And so if we go back 50, 60 years, that was really the focus of our thinking. It was about reducing hunger in the world. And so I remember reading documents from those times. It's good to go back, and the storyline was that Asia will never be able to feed itself. Okay, so we're now in a very different position, I think. Although there is still massive hunger and food insecurity in the world, we've made tremendous progress. Now, part of that was technology, so we've had new technologies developed, but part of it was also policy systems. If you look in those days, I mean, China had massive hunger because of distorted systems, the same thing in other parts of the world. We've had major policy reforms since then. So we've had big policy reforms in China at the end of the 1970s, in Vietnam, middle of the 1980s, in former Soviet Union, for example. India liberalized its trade regime with major effects in the early 1990s. And for example, the European Union and other rich countries reformed their policies to reduce the distortions. I mean, those were the days when D. Gale Johnson wrote about the world markets in disarray. So we've really made a lot of progress since then. But at the same time, we have come to realize that that was not enough, that we have had a too narrow focus, I think, on distortions, market incentives of market distortions, etc. And so there's major problems, things. And so many of them have been mentioned already. A new report of the Food Systems Economics Commission came up with an estimate of between 10 and 50 trillion dollars of hidden cost of our current food system. I mean, similar numbers that the FAO estimated, and they have to do with the health cost of our food system, with the environmental cost of our food system, and other factors. Another factor was when we were thinking about market distortions, etc., and incentives to change this, we talk about levels of prices. Okay, what we've seen over the last 25 years is that market volatility has become as much an issue as actually the level of the prices. I mean, before, remember in 2007, 2008, when prices suddenly shot up, people talked about the price shock. Price shock means you move away from stability, okay? But if you look at the last 25 years, there's no stability. I mean, there's a huge volatile market. So that means that resilience, dealing with these volatile markets, food systems are really crucial to it. Fragility also has to do with people. And so right now, what is actually an amazing and a negative amazing factor is that between 1990 and 2015, we had roughly 40 million people, displaced people by conflict in the world. Right now, we're over 100 million. It's been a huge increase over the last decade, okay? And that, of course, is associated with huge sense of acute food insecurity, and Ms. McLean obviously referred to it. This is very, very close to the work that she's doing. Another factor is that...
Recording in progress.
Sorry, I missed that. So right. Sorry? And another thing is that agriculture is increasingly a smaller share of the food system. Okay, right now the global estimates is it's around 35%. But that means that even in lower middle and middle income countries, these numbers are agriculture is really a relatively small part. That means we have to look at it in the total perspective. So what does that mean? Recognizing that we have to look at the food system as a whole, or the food, land, and water system as a whole, in itself doesn't solve the problem, right? So it means we need packages of policies, and these packages of policies are needed both for economic, for efficiency reasons, because we need to address a number of different objectives, but at the same time, you need new technologies, better incentives, reduced risk, etc., and that all has to come together. It's also needed for political economy reasons, because you have to compensate people who are worse off or getting worse off by the necessary changes that have to take place. So that means there's a lot of work for us to be done by identifying trade-offs, by identifying win-win situations going forward. That makes our life complicated as analysts. It also makes life difficult for policymakers. So we should not be naive. These are very difficult transitions that need to take place. And so it's, on the one hand, we have to put together winning coalitions, okay, or coalitions, people who are moving this forward. At the same time, people who do not like the reforms will have it easier almost to organize because they can pick and choose things they don't like, particularly in an area of social media, identify the crew, basically certain things with simplistic messages. So it's going to be a very hard change, but we have no choice. We have to go forward on that.
Well, you mentioned about... Okay, round of applause. Well, you mentioned about the multiple win solutions to transform food systems. The multiple win technologies, for example, Iris rice, not just high yielding, but also better nutrition. I will come back to your nutrition issues. Micronutrient deficiency is a serious problem here. How can we use breeding to increase nutrition contents of rice? Iron, zinc, vitamin A. Even no glycemia index for people who are diabetic. They can continue to consume rice. But I think equally important is the policy, as you said. You know, when we design the policies in the 60s, 70s, we only have one objective. That is high yielding, to feed our stomach. But today, we must use multiple wins. So this morning, I met with Asha Gulati and our Minister Fett. We're thinking of writing a book called Elephant, Dragon, and the Monkey. Elephant is India. Dragon is China. The monkey is Vietnam. But these three countries have experienced rapid transformation of policies. So I think this multiple win policy is also very critical. Okay, let's move to Joe. This is Joe, then is Joe. Right, Joe Puri from IFAD. So your 5 minutes intervention.
Thank you so much, Engen. Ministers, President Massa, such a pleasure for me to be here and to be representing the International Fund for Agricultural Development at this forum. I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about food sovereignty, I'm going to talk about money, and as the minister from Palau said, it's not just about the money. And I'm going to talk about the last mile. So three things. The first is food sovereignty. I think we all speak about resilience, and resilience is a many splendid thing. But what we're realizing is, and especially with the price hikes that we've seen because of the war in Ukraine, COVID, etc., that what countries really need to develop towards and really need to develop are their own systems so that they can deal with these crises. In our work, and our work with the ADB, also in Asia and Pacific, but also our work in Africa, what we're learning is that countries and regions really want to be food secure, especially when these crises occur. And they don't want to be waiting for global food systems and global value chains to be taking this forward. So let me be very clear. This is not saying that trade and global value chains are not important. They're superbly important. But as economists, we also realize that this is not a zero-sum game. We know that we can expand the size of the cake while also ensuring that people are becoming far more secure. And with developing food systems and value chains that are also looking at local markets and local producers, we are able to ensure that security. So in our own analysis at IFAD, what we found is that those value chains that were very local during these crises and those that were depending on markets that were local were able to deal with a lot of the disruptions than the others, and so we have the counterfactual as well. And this is something that I think we need to take forward as we go along. The second thing is really thinking about the money. And as the minister said, we are producing today enough food for 10 billion people. We've got a population of 8 billion globally. And yet, we have malnourishment, we have undernourishment, and we have food insecurity. So clearly, the problem is not about the money. The problem is about distribution. It's about setting up systems so that we are able to deliver at the last mile. A lot of the changes, and I'm hoping that my slides are up. So while we are recognizing, so if we could go to the couple of slides, Shengen, I just have a couple. If we could go to the next one. I have no idea who's controlling them. Thank you. So as part of the overall effort that IFAD is making along with the World Bank and supported by FAO and the OECD, we're looking at global financial flows, and especially looking at ODA, and trying to see, well, how much of this is going into food systems? Next, please. And what we're recognizing is that if you do not include the COVID years between 2019 and 2020, but from 2018 to 2021, ODA to food systems has actually increased, right, to approximately $44 billion. Now, this is food systems, so I'm not just talking about SDG 2, so that's really important. But the second thing to notice is that we had to devise a classification, and I really want to acknowledge the team from IFAD that's here, that's working along with our sister agencies to understand how much of this is going into food systems. When we started to work at the Food Systems Coordination Hub, we realized that actually not a lot of data is out there that is internationally accepted. So this includes data that is coming from what's called the CRS, and looking at, and this is an OECD database, looking at nutrition, social assistance, agriculture and value chains, climate and infrastructure. And all of these now have been accepted by a lot of the agencies that work in this space. Next, please. What we're also finding is that the overall proportion that is going into food systems is marginally increasing. But, next please, the leaders that are there in the food systems, so it's the DAC members, it's the multilateral agencies, and it's the non-DAC members, next please, are really focusing on these 5 things. And as expected, we know that a lot of the overall ODA is going into humanitarian assistance, and that's the top row that you're seeing. What is not sufficient currently is the amount of assistance that is going into nutrition, which is the last row. So that percentage is very, very small, still, as an overall percentage of what we are seeing as ODA. Next, please. And then this is the last slide, which is really showing who are the top 10 multilateral donors to food systems. And as you can see, ADB, that's, I think, the second row on top, if you can't see the slide. I beg your pardon. ADB and IFAD are really working. So ADB and IFAD is at approximately 577 million, and ADB at 384. But this is just those that are tagged to food systems. And what we're recognizing, and I think this is the last of my slides, but what we're recognizing is that clearly very important to try and understand how we can measure and how we can tag these. And my last point then, Shengen, in this context, is that we really need to nudge the multilateral and the international system into measuring our impacts far better. Where we are losing out, and if you look at a lot of the data that we are producing through our impact assessments as well, is that yes, we are able to develop these agricultural value chains, that we are able to provide and deliver resources to smallholder farmers who are responsible for approximately 1/3 of the overall food that we produce, that we consume. But nutrition patterns in these targeted areas are not changing dramatically. Nutrition patterns are still, not surprisingly, very dependent on access to markets, and actually they're becoming less diversified, as the minister from Palau said, in these areas, unless we pay attention to developing local markets. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joe. Let's give you a round of applause. So this is the total aid. It's not just amount, but also the distribution of how to use it. You know, production versus whole value chain versus humanitarian aid. And I also think we need to think about so-called local production, local consumption, local market. We used to preach global trade, free global trade. But if we integrate climate change, smallholders, poor people's well-being, so that sort of a preach may have to rethink how we can really make sure that it is the people at a local level will benefit from the whole food system transformation. Thank you. Now, this round I will be a bit tougher. So instead of sort of free thinking, free speech, I wanted to ask you some specific questions. So we'll start with Cindy. Now, I know you are very passionate about nutrition. The region is facing some grave challenges. On the one hand, hunger, micronutrients you mentioned, micronutrient deficiency, and increasing overweight, obesity. In the region, I read some number. More than 50%, some countries even more than 60% of the population is either overweight and obese. So how can we tackle the so-called triple burden of malnutrition? And particularly using WFP's experience. I know WFP has used nutrition to guide its work for the last 20 or 30 years. It's actually one of the first UN agencies to use nutrition to guide your work. So I wanted to hear from your perspective, how do we make sure that WFP or even other UN organizations to really take nutrition seriously? I think Joe also mentioned nutrition issues. We can continue to talk, but we really need a real action.
Well, I appreciate the question, number one. Nutrition is a huge challenge, as you just stated, around the world, as well as just this region. There are several points to be made in this, and the things that we work with at WFP. There's a lack of affordable, nutritious diets, and this is the root cause for nutrition insecurity in many places, especially in the Asia Pacific. Right now, there's around 400 million people here in Asia that are undernourished, and 64 million of them are children. That's 40% of the global total. To improve outcomes, we need to see malnutrition as a development challenge and integrated across key programs. Food system initiatives, social protection programs such as school feedings, and of course private sector partnerships. WFP has an extensive expertise in supporting governments and partners on nutrition programs, including running specialist nutrition programs for vulnerable groups during food security shocks. That means, i.e., pregnant and feeding women and children under 5. Providing technical support for government social protection programs to boost access to healthy diets. Cash programs, school feeding programs. Using advanced data and analytical tools to support better prediction and preparedness to give the right support at the right time. So it was mentioned also, if I may, just off the cuff here a little bit, it was mentioned by our minister from Palau about the need to change cultures, change minds about food. That could not be more important than it is right now. Changing the culture of food is imperative because before we can actually offer up nutritious foods or suggest nutritious foods and give nutritious foods, we've got to change hearts and minds, and that's a key part of what we do. We also need to think outside the box when we're talking about this kind of stuff. It's a new world, and we can't do business as usual when it comes to nutrition or any kind of food security issues. So thinking outside the box, working with different problems in different ways, and implementing them on the ground, which is what WFP does. And working with not just specific communities or specific farms, but whole communities in this. School feeding programs are a good example of that as well. So that's just a few. And of course, as was mentioned, data and science and technology has to play a key role in all this right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Cindy. I think healthy diet is very critical. Healthy diets for preschool children, for, let's say, women, and I must say for elderly person. Our region is aging very fast. How can we make sure that we provide healthy diets for them? I think we should include elderly people. I'm over 60 now. No, me too. Anyway, so thank you, Cindy. Now let me move to the Minister Wanirachi. So Sri Lanka obviously is facing huge challenges, particularly climate change. Climate change will affect your water resources, irrigation, your infrastructure. Is Sri Lanka prepared to tackle these challenges, particularly water and irrigation? You know, you are hosting International Water Management Institute. I'm pretty sure CGIAR will be very happy to work with you. So, any thoughts on how the government will take certain actions to tackle some of the challenges from water issues?
As I mentioned earlier, I would like to say we have taken so many steps to tackle these challenges when it comes to Sri Lanka. So as I mentioned earlier, our country was bankrupt and we were in a very big financial crisis. So that was affected to farmers. So what we have done, firstly, we were able to provide long-term grace period of loans of about 8 to 12 months grace period of loans for the repayment for the farmers. And what we have done was the second thing to overcome these challenges, we imposed import ban on non-essential items such as vehicles, luxurious items, to secure and to enable sufficient foreign exchange to import food and fertilizer. Then what we were able to provide, like earlier I said, cash payments and food aid in the form of dry rations for the needy people that was battling food security. And again, I want to thank ADB. So through a special request made to the ADB, thank you, President.
Yeah, thank you, Minister.
We were able to obtain 10 million US dollars for agriculture promotion.
Right.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we'll be very happy to work with you. I remember maybe 10 years ago when I visited Sri Lanka government sent us a very special request how we can help to control the wild animals. Well, that's a pretty tough question. All these wild animals, including monkey, move around. Not easy to control. This has never been our research topic. But we have to address the real issues the countries are facing. Okay, let me move to Minister Victor. Here we already talked quite a bit about nutrition. I think Pala is a Pacific country. When these countries begin to open up, liberalize the trade, obesity is going up. And there's a high correlation. Well, I think Cindy mentioned about behavior change. Actually, you also mentioned about behavior change. But what sort of concrete government policies, strategies can do to make sure that the country can produce healthy and nutritious foods, not just from land, but also from your very rich coastal area? And make sure that the knowledge and information are communicated to individual citizens. I know, some of the Pacific region have highest overweight, obesity, has highest non-communicable diseases due to poor diet. Minister.
Thank you. Palau, I think, ranks second or third in the Pacific as some of the most obese people. So we know and we experience this challenge. It's putting a lot of stress on our health system. We send a lot of our patients to Manila or to Taiwan for medical reasons, because as a country we're not able to address these health issues. So when we talk about this issue of nutritious, healthy food, the need to change behavior. We choose to eat this unhealthy food because it is fast, it's accessible, it's not necessarily affordable, but it's there. Palau, we have a land area of only 160 square kilometer with roughly about 30% that would be arable. So agriculture is very challenging to develop in Palau. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't develop it. So the way we've approached this challenge is really starting at the school. Forget about me, I've made the choice of eating something unhealthy. But what about my children? Can I change their food preference? And the next generation, I think it's very possible. So it's really around focusing on health education, educating the young children, and making them create that connection to growing their food, not expecting that their food will be grown somewhere else and imported to Palau. Because when we look about resilient well-being of Palau, we talk about resilient economy, resilient environment, and resilient Palauan as an individual. That resilience depends on how we are able to meet our own food security, not dependent on elsewhere. Because we're a very small economy. We export value outside of Palau. For every dollar, we may export maybe over 50% of that value. And so when we talk about resilient economy, we cannot grow an economy by exporting the limited financing that we have, because we have to buy food from outside of Palau. We have a population of roughly 18,000, but we have a visiting population of over 100,000 pre-pandemic. So we're not having to feed ourselves now, we're having to feed visitors. So how do we make choices about what we feed our population and what we feed to tourism? So these are policy challenges that we face with currently limited production. So we're thinking about tripling production by 2030, but tripling production not in a way that impact our environment, that takes the responsibility from Palauans to our foreigners to come and farm in Palau. So really empowering Palauans to farm again, to invest in our future by investing in our children, investing in a healthy environment and a healthy well-being of Palauan people. Thank you.
The Minister. I think here the food environment is a key word, food environment. The whole value chain, the whole policy, how food is produced, processed, and expedited through the marketing channels. Now, Yo, I want to come back to you. Now, as economists, we know money is not everything, but without money, we cannot do anything. So how can we make sure that we finance the right investment to transform our food system? Financing. The key word is financing.
Thank you. Yes, finance at the heart of food systems transformation for exactly the reasons that you explain. At this point, there is at the same time not sufficient finance, I think, for basically making this work. At the same time, what is there is not always giving the incentives in the right way. It's actually misdirecting it in a number of ways, as has been explained already. Now, the other Jo already showed some graphs on ODA, and also Director General Xu had some on it. So I'm not going to talk much about that. Let me say focus on a few other aspects of finance. One is consumer spending. This is the most important source of finance is consumer spending. And so how this is basically triggering through the value chain down to the farm level as well. Value chain finance is the most important source of finance actually for agriculture in the world, not always sufficiently recognized. And so that means we need a system where the changed preferences, changed sustainability criteria so have to go through the value chain to reach the farmers to induce change in investments and behavior. Okay, so that has to do. So that a number of changes are needed. Consumer spending and basically how these changes are triggering, how the signals are triggering, the information streams coming with it, and the institutions that are needed for it, and of course also basically the sustainability criteria used by private companies in the food chain. The value chain is important for another reason. We know, everybody points at that agriculture only gets 3% for all the climate financing, which is way below its role in the whole climate change issue. Now, one of the reasons for that is because, or is associated with the fragmentation of farms. People now say, listen, the energy sector, the transport sector, we're going to make the changes there because we're working with big companies, big organizations, and so it will be able, maybe too late and too slow, but we're going to make it. Agriculture is not possible because it's too fragmented. That's exactly where the value chain comes in. If you look at the value chain, the processing, the trading, the retailing companies, they are not smallholders. They are often very large companies. So we have to use this concentration, the scales which are there in order to make change possible also at the agricultural sector level. Another issue is debt relief. The highest problems of malnutrition are also in the countries where there's the highest debts. And so therefore we have to think about debt relief linked with improvements in malnutrition in the world, I think. And then the last point I want to make has to do with domestic spending. And so there is an issue there. We have to repurpose domestic spending both on the consumption side and on the production side. On the consumption side has been mentioned by several people on the panel here. There's a lot of funds already going, probably not enough, but still after COVID it has picked up on social safety spending, on school feeding programs, etc. We have to link this to more nutritious food which is being provided there. It's an easy objective in a way. I mean, it's easy conceptually. How in implementing it may be difficult for a number of reasons, but at least that's an obvious choice we have to make. There's also repurposing that needs to be done on the production side. There's about $800 billion ag subsidies, agricultural subsidies in the world right now. People often say when you bring this thing to the agenda, well, it's essentially China, the EU, and the US, okay? That's really where the spending is, so it's not a developing country problem or a low middle income country. That's not true. Okay, if you look at the share of the spending in these countries, of agriculture minister spending, going to subsidies, often to fertilizer subsidies, it's large. Okay, so also there's a lot of repurposing that can be done. I mean, if you look, for example, in Africa, only 3 countries in sub-Saharan Africa spend more than 1% of their GDP on, or ag GDP, on research and development. All the rest is in this type of subsidy. There's a lot that can be done to be done better. And clearly also in the rest of the world, these 800 billion can be spent much more effectively in terms of inducing the type of changes that we need. Let me leave it at that.
Yes. So there will be a deep dive in on repurposing subsidies. I think that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So if you are interested, please go to that session. Thank you. Now, Joe, you mentioned about local production, local consumption, and local market. I think this is fascinating. how IFAD can support that.
Thanks, Shengen. So IFAD has been working with smallholder producers and farmers actually since its inception. We're recognizing the wonderful one-third rule. One-third of the overall food is produced by smallholder farmers. One-third of the total emissions that we witness in this globally today actually comes from agri-food systems. And one-third of the overall food that we produce actually gets lost or wasted, right? So there's a one-third rule somewhere. And this is exactly what we've been looking at as we've worked with smallholder producers and farmers on the ground for the past 40 years. We're recognizing that it is important, as Yo said, to build those financing systems, because with smallholder farmers it becomes, and that's where we are really trying to build markets, to your question, Shengen. And that's where we are trying to really influence also nutrition patterns. But the big challenges in rural areas and with smallholder farmers is essentially the challenge of developing those value chains in an aggregate way so that you can actually get those economies of scale, which is really what is required by the big funders out there, whether it's the commercial funders or it's the big MDBs or whether it's the big IFIs out there. So we work with smallholder farmers, but we also work with off-takers so that we can produce, so that we can aggregate that produce, and then we invest in value chains as well as the enabling environment around it so that we can alter policy. But I think the key challenge in this space, other than the things that I mentioned earlier and the panel mentioned earlier, it's not just about the money, are two other things. One, small is still beautiful. I think it is really important for us to invest in those smallholders. You made this point as well. But the third one is the political economy of decision making. And I think that's the area that we don't focus sufficiently. So IFAD is taking this on essentially in an upfront way and recognizing that decision making and political economy of decision making requires that we need to have a greater appetite for risk taking. And that risk-taking, and I think ADB is in the same space, really is dependent on our ability to lend to countries that are otherwise indebted already, but where the perceptions of risks are far greater than what is happening on the ground. And therefore, and this is a clarion call out, we need to find out from credit risk rating agencies as to how they can change the overall system so that institutions such as IFAD and ADB can truly transform our space out there. And I can give you lots of examples of how we are putting blended finance platforms together, also with the ADB. But the challenge in there also is that it takes a very long time to put those blended platforms together. It took us about approximately 2 years to put the Africa Rural Climate Adaptation Financing Mechanism. And that's too long for the private sector to be sitting around. Thanks.
Joe, is Farah still online? Well, if not, we have some questions from online. But before we do that, I want to ask Cindy. As you know, the food system basically are facing probably two grand challenges. On the one hand is the people, food and nutrition security. Okay, Farah, you wanted to go ahead? I wanted to ask you a question. I know US is very active in supporting G7's food security. We also know that US is part of G20. So how G7 and G20 work together with other international agencies, OECD countries, emerging economies, to really have a coordinated global approach to tackle the global food security challenges. Can you answer this question very briefly?
Oh, briefly. That's a timely question.
Well, 2 days, but we don't have that much time.
I'm in the middle of actually writing a lot of the concerns for G7 and G20 G7, similarly, producer countries are asking the hard question of how do we really work on resilient food systems and invest in places and partners to be able to deal with shocks into the future, particularly as opposed to climate. At G20, the Brazilian presidency is focused heavily on poverty reduction as part of their global task force. Specifically, how do we actually take these leader level discussions, not only established at G7 2 to 3 years ago post the Ukraine war, but how do we continue the work that's necessary both on financing, but also asking donors to innovatively bring together partners and scale innovative ways to really talk about the food system. We've talked about how these are important, but what are the knock-on poverty effects of nutrition, the reductions in it really adhering to not only SDG 2, but really talking about how can we create livelihoods beyond to the first century. G20 is setting the bar of our priorities and coming together on how is our developing partners at the same time as producer countries adhering to these issues of nutrition, issues in terms of scalability, issues in terms of also financing to come about blended financing. This is the first time in the G20 that they're considering it as part of the finance track, along with the Sherpa track of the G20. So it's not just policy for policy's sake, but it's also financing and coming up with